Hello all and welcome to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. Today, we are officially finishing up the cleanup of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and the minimum weapon challenge. And while we're at this, I figured I would take a moment to kind of discuss exactly what it is that really went into this run in and of itself. See, a lot of the time I feel that a challenge run or a run of a video game in general that falls under a specific set of rules often ends up either being far easier or far harder than the player or planner expected it to be. And I think Breath of the Wild is one of these cases that definitely fits under that expectation. See, I understood that at any point in time, I was always going to have access to the basic runes. The Bomb rune in particular being a easy-to-use, hard-to-master type of tool, something that was always going to be available no matter what. That's kind of what I was expecting with it. And so, knowing that, I was effectively running the entire game and planning the entire game around the fact that there can and would be a way around virtually any and every single challenge imaginable. And so I went gung-ho with it. Said, let's see what I can get into. Let's see how much of this game is actually completable with the minimum usage of conventional weapons. And it went off without a hitch. It was an absolute blast. It was fun. It was enjoyable. It was enlightening. And the more I played, the more I questioned how much could actually be possible. How many of these shrines are really going to mess with the capabilities of Link being able to actually complete whatever it is that happened to come up and say, yeah, let's do this, And initially, I was under the expectations that there were going to be a few blockades. First and foremost would be any shrine that required the use of the bow. Sometimes there would be a way around certain shrines that would be a little bit, let's say, outside the realm of expectations. For example, using bombs in a situation where you're expected to be using swords, shields, bows, etc. in all of the combat shrines. I knew that was going to be a thing going in. And admittedly, I avoided those types of shrines just as a result of, hey, I really don't feel like slamming my head against a brick wall just yet. Let's hold off on this. Let's wait a little while. And I think it worked for the most part. I've gotten to a point where I can guarantee I will be able to beat virtually any one of the shrines just on the merit of I know I have the capabilities. I've fought virtually every single enemy entity in this game, excluding a Lionel, and I thought, yeah, that's perfectly fine. It's going to be great. We've got this. And I think I overestimated myself just a little bit. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. Every individual player is going to have their own expectations, their own limitations. And while it might be a spoiler, I can say that I get the opportunity to say that I complete 104 shrines in this game as a whole. I think missing out on 16 shrines, some of which are I have to use a weapon to even activate them, like the ones revolving around Zora's domain, or having to defeat one of the divine beasts, which require weapons to be able to access. Of course, I'm going to end up in a situation where I have 5, 6, or in this case, 16 uncompletable shrines. That's just math. That's just reality. But what I like about this particular set of circumstances, I suppose, is the fact that I know that no matter what happened, I can say I did it. I can say I pushed this game to whatever limitations I felt were even remotely reasonable. I don't want to say that every game out there should be pushed to the ridiculous lengths that I have pushed Breath of the Wild to. I think that going through and playing games in this manner is admittedly very interesting and very fun, but it's not a dare. It's a warning to those unfortunate enough to come in your footsteps. There we go. So, with that all being said, I suppose a little bit of additional information is necessary here. See, throughout everything I've been doing up to this point, Breath of the Wild has had a lot of situations that have come up. And today is just the cleanup. The last hurrah of playing through the game before endgame, before attempting the final boss gauntlet. And I know very well that I am going to probably fail in this endeavor to some degree. But I also am going to say very categorically that no matter what I did, no matter how I did it, it was fun, it was interesting, and dare I say, kind of out there, kind of wacky. And I don't want to say that's a bad thing. Too often I see people talk about games as if they are a one-and-done circumstance, where you'll play it once and you'll never pick it up again. And that might be true for some games. But Breath of the Wild is the type of game, in my mind, that has always been reapproachable. There's a new angle, there's more information hidden out there somewhere. The storyline itself is told to you through, often, subcontext. And that's part of the draw of Zelda as a whole. If I were to tell you that I loved Zelda because it tried to push the boundaries of storytelling to me, if it tried to maybe not make everything overt, make some information just based on where you stand. An example being the battlefields out into the south end of Kakariko Village. Those had a meaning. They had something that went haywire for those battlegrounds to have ever existed. You have locations where entire regions of the story are left untapped, and there are others where they'll hint at it. An example being Akala Citadel. You can tell it's one of the last locations, shall you say, protecting the bulk of Hyrule from a threat from the sea. You know that. But you don't know how it fell. All you know is that there's a series of guardians around it, and that's pretty well it. I like that. That not so overt, very, this is how it is, you're gonna have to dig for it, does suit me. Now, why I wanted to bring all of this up, why I want to talk about this right now, is because, for me, games always have replayability. And it might not be the most subtle thing out there, even playing a one-off game like a Mega Man, or in the one I'm going to mention is Dead Charge, that are relatively short, relatively contained storylines. You can easily go back, play it again, and see, maybe did I miss something? Was there more to this than I had anticipated? That is totally reasonable to expect. Maybe there is something more. Maybe there isn't. But sometimes knowing something from later on in the plot can illuminate something that happened earlier on. And so, for me, there's always a level of replayability. Changing up how you play to be the most chaotic way of playing Breath of the Wild is another potential way you could look at it. Breath of the Wild has always had a bit of replayability. Whether it's choosing the different types of weapons, whether it's choosing different levels of completion, going for low hearts, high hearts, going for all stamina, choosing to find and upgrade every single piece of armor, or go on the collectathon of the ages and find absolutely everything there is to do with Zelda Breath of the Wild. They are all very reasonable options to go for. And so, as I was going through this in general, I had this goal of beating the game in a way that I think very few people ever would. That very few people would ever look at and say, this, right here, this is what I want to see. Very few people would ever say, this is how I want to play the game. Because, let's be real, very few people would ever be interested in playing Breath of the Wild as a minimum weapon challenge. Because doing so with minimum weapons takes away a lot of what makes Breath of the Wild's combat system work. Not entirely, but enough that it always left me questioning, was this the right decision? Do I really want to do this? And that level of, do I actually want this, was, I think, the hardest part about this whole ordeal, this whole challenge, the whole run, was dependent on whether or not I had the stamina, the drive to finish it. And at that point, I have to say that I did make a mistake in that regard. Going as hard into the direction of, I'm gonna see what I can do without using weapons, is very much something that I said I wanted to do, that I wanted to try. But I didn't expect the level of dedication it would require. I understood that it was going to be a longer, more drawn-out challenge. I understood that every single time I got involved and fought a major antagonist, or one of the divine beasts, or dare I say, even tried to fight any of the Ganon Blights, or a major test of strength, were going to come with significant consequences for the rule set that I had made. And that is part of what I think makes this run so unique. I knew going in what I was walking into. I knew that I would be very distraught and disoriented trying to catch up and fix this run, make it work to the degree that I was initially expecting. But I am also nothing if not stubborn. I just had to throw my head against a wall a few dozen times. Now, the reality is that of the shrines that I cannot complete, I've already mentioned they mostly required weapons, required some story event. But the ones that I could complete that I didn't expect to were ones like a balanced approach, ones like the stolen heirloom, which I had, for the longest time, thought that I was not going to be able to complete, just on the basis of maybe I needed more to do with the camera, maybe I needed to collect all of the memories, maybe I needed to do this or fight Master Koga, or maybe I needed to defeat one or two of the divine beasts before it would unlock. I didn't know. I wanted to go by the mentality of anything is possible, but I always had this little shred of doubt, like, is it really? Could I do it? And I think that's something that I would like to be a little more cognizant of going forward. Now, reality is, it's a game. And every single player is going to have a certain level of... Every single player is going to have a slightly different approach, a slightly different understanding. And there's nothing wrong with that in any way, shape, or form. Why I like doing challenge runs is mostly because, for me, every single run breaks convention. Yes, I could play a game on the hardest difficulty for the first time, and that will be that. No need to stress, no need to worry, just play the game. And overdo it. Showcase every single thing you can do with this more, I suppose, more or less lenient set of rules. You could also go the complete opposite direction. The limiting side. The limiting side of these challenge runs is the one that I tend to go with. Avoiding using certain abilities, avoiding using certain tools, avoiding this, avoiding that. To use these items or even to fall in combat during a circumstance. That's what the bulk of my challenge and challenges, personal challenges, end up kind of revolving around is I could do this. I just don't know how yet. And I think that side of things, that how far can you push it, is what really drives me to do these types of things. I think it's what drives a lot of people to do what they do when it comes to personal challenges and breaking games, so to speak. If you look at a speedrunner, they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly how they're going to break the game. The question isn't an if, but how quickly. They understand that there are certain things that you can get away with and beat in more ridiculous ways or faster than what the game intends. You just need to understand the ins and outs. I will never be a speedrunner. Not truly. But the more I look at these types of challenges, the more I realize, there's a little bit more to this. There's a little bit more of a connection I have with these individuals than I initially thought. See, a lot of the time, people who jump into doing speed runs or challenge runs or try to break the convention of a game do so because they don't really have much left to do. Reality is that I'm an individual who has played Breath of the Wild for the 3-heart run. I have played through the every heart run. I have completed every shrine, found every Korok. I have completed every single side quest. And I wanted more out of the game. I wanted to experience this version of Hyrule one more time. And I understand that doing so as a bomb style probably wasn't the necessarily the play. It's dangerous, it's painful, it's slow, but it's also more methodical. It's more about figuring out your cans and cannots. It's about figuring out enemy patterns. It's about learning how best to really use what tools you have, no matter how limited they may be. So, in my mind, yeah, I'm playing a game as wrong as I possibly can. And I couldn't be any happier for it. Anyways, we now have completed, I suppose, 1-2 shrines at most in this particular... No, 1 shrine in this video. The 1 shrine that was completed was a balanced approach. Now, initially I had expected this one to be an impossible one. I didn't have anything I could reach up to the top of the pillars that were fluctuating, and I didn't have any means of opening the door. Now, at an earlier point in time, I thought maybe do the wind bomb glitch. Just launch myself up there. If I could get up to one of those two pedestals, then congratulations. That's all she wrote, and the mission was complete. The entire run, or that particular shrine, would be completable relatively easily once certain circumstances had been met, right? But reality is that I didn't have... I got lucky, if I'm being honest. The bombs that I had been using actually caused the pillars to fluctuate, to bow and bend slightly. This slight change of height allowed certain things, or allowed me to get a bomb high enough to blast away a breakable box, which effectively allowed me to complete the shrine as normal. And I have no issue with that. To me, it was a test of, is this possible? Yes or no. And reality is, it was possible. But it was possible because of patience and realizing that the pillars were moving ever so slightly. So I could use the pillars' gradual movement to my advantage to allow me to complete the shrine. This Kakariko Village shrine is more or less the same. I had been so focused on one of the side quests that I had completely neglected one, not realizing that it was the trigger for the second side quest that I was trying to get done. Knowing that I had effectively skipped a major side quest just by happenstance, coming back, cleaning that up, and doing all of those side quests in Kakariko Village allows me to be able to clean up a second shrine, which puts us at a grand total of, I think, 98 at this moment in time. And going forward from here, most of these shrines are combat trials. And I realize that I shouldn't have left all of these to last minute. But the big problem with a lot of these combat shrines is that they had, I think it was 4 minor tests of strength at most, and I think maybe 5 moderates at most, and then they had like 8 or 9 major tests. And the 8 or 9 major tests of strength, when you beat one, you effectively can beat them all. And that's kind of a letdown for me, because it meant effectively that once one of them fell, I had to just grind and fight through all of them. And at 10 to 15 minutes of throwing bombs at a robot each, it just becomes a lot. A lot of patience, a lot of just hoping for the best. And I'd love to say that that was all there was to it. That I could just say, yeah, this is the end of it, that's how it works, that's how it goes. I'd really wish that I had something other than all of these combat shrines to do. But I'm also stubborn, in that if I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. And I was going to make sure that every single shrine would be on camera. That every single challenge would be done on camera. And that to me is important. Because 50 years from now, as I am old and decrepit, I could look back at this and say, hey, I can come back to this 50 years from now and say, yeah, this is what I did. I did that. I was capable of doing this. And to me, being able to say or look back on one's achievements, even if they are game-related or messing around, 100%, you should be able to take pride in it. You should be able to say, yeah, I did that. I was capable of doing that. I managed that. Because nobody is going to be able to tell you for you. Nobody is going to be able to say, hey, this is what you used to do. Now, for me, is this perhaps a little bit chaotic? Absolutely. But I will always say that no matter what it is that I do, no matter how I've done it, no matter what it is that came up that led me to such a circumstance, I'm done it. I've managed it. And that is something that very few, I think, can say. Now, a little bit of a look ahead. Because reality is that after today, there's probably at max 2 videos for this particular series left. And the reason why is because I'm planning one just for the run up Hyrule Castle, and one for the battle against Calamity Ganon as a whole. Now, the reason I want to split this up into 2 videos is because I already feel like the battle against Calamity Ganon is going to be excessive, to say the least. But I also believe that the run through Hyrule Castle is important. It's, shall we say, that moment, that culmination of everything you've completed. Everything you've done. And in other Zeldas, when you're going through Hyrule Castle for the first time, I'm looking at Ocarina of Time, or in this case, Ganon's Tower. You're starting up that tower and you can hear the organ music playing in the background. You can tell that there's something going on, you can tell there's more to this dungeon. And every step you take, the music gets louder. At first, seeming very ominous, kind of background music. And the further up the tower you get, the louder the music becomes. The more foreboding it becomes, the more the ramp in power becomes in general. It gave you a sense of finality. That this is the final boss. This is what your adventure, what Zelda Ocarina of Time was intended to culminate in. A duel with Ganondorf himself. The penultimate challenge, the final duel in and of itself. And for me, I have remembered that I used to hesitate. Used to climb those stairs thinking, okay, what's up the next set of rounds? What's up the next set? What's around the next bend? Am I going to get jumped at by a Lizalfos? Is there going to be something more? I was terrified of what that final boss would be. And when I entered the room of the final boss, I remember seeing Ganondorf sitting there just aura farming, playing his organ, and thinking, this guy doesn't see me as a threat. He has no semblance, no understanding of what I'm capable of. Or maybe he does, and that's exactly why he's just sitting here, relaxed as all can be, knowing that there is nothing that the player can do to stop him. And that did cross my mind at first. This level of fear and raw power being shown to me through Ganondorf had me feeling like maybe I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I'd argue this. Every single player is going to have a slightly different experience fighting the final bosses. I remember my first battle with Calamity Ganon, where all of the big laser beams launched at the center pillar and effectively dealt half of Ganon's health in damage to him in one go, and I thought to myself, he's already half done. He can't defeat me. There's nothing he can do, knowing that I've already fought the 4 blights. Calamity Ganon's going to be a joke. Only to realize that I still hadn't learned how to properly parry despite having all 120 shrines. And I had to learn that skill on the fly, fighting the boss. Now, let me be honest, I did not lose to Calamity Ganon, but I was very terrified about the fact that I didn't have an answer for Calamity Ganon's raw power. I didn't have a solution planned out for whatever he had to throw at me. Because I was expecting, once again, that Ganon was just going to play a round of tennis against me. And ultimately lose said round of tennis like he does every game. But that's the thing. Every player goes in a totally different set of expectations. Now, for me, my favorite bosses have always been the ones that have a sense of foreboding, a sense of finality to them. Girahim and Zant being a pair that I've always loved. And I think you can get the sense that I love Twilight Princess just on the fact that it's the one that I reference the most, aside from Ocarina of Time, because Ocarina of Time is the one everybody knows. But the thing is that bosses and battles, and battle systems in general, Breath of the Wild systems are probably the most advanced they've ever been. You have the shield bashes, you have access to perfect parries, you have access to combat solutions that at the time of Ocarina of Time were never even conceived. Bullet time, elemental arrows on the fly, you have access to multiple types of weapons ranging from short range, long range. You have access to heavy weapons, axes, boomerangs, you have access to magic stabs. You have access to all of these tools that make Link and combat in Breath of the Wild that much more unique, that much more entertaining. You have the ability to stop time and throw a tree at a Yiga clansman, because why not? Now, combat in Zelda has actually come an incredibly long way from its origins. Now, for those that might not know, the original Zelda had some very to-be-desired combat systems. While you did have access to tools like boomerangs and bows, even bombs, most of the time these tools were underwhelming at best. They were just more or less longer ranged options. But the thing is that when you first started playing the game, it kind of threw at you this very basic set of tools, which was your sword. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this, after all. And your sword had the ability to launch beams of energy at your opponents. Now, this is also mimicked with the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild if you have full health. But the thing is that these laser beams were used as an option for long-range combat, and a lot of players actually, when they were first getting used to Zelda and its combat, would just try to launch the laser beams at their opponent, knowing full well that that was their ranged option, that was what was going to get them through the game. And so, with that, the original Zelda had tools, but they weren't the greatest. Your main sword combat technique was simply a simple stab, if you will. A quick jab, one-off, and he was back to a neutral position. Now, the neutral position that actually comes up a lot in 2D Zelda. But every 2D Zelda, barring Zelda 2, started to innovate a little bit on what the combat system was intended to be. Zelda 2 took the basic stabs and improved upon it, allowing for crouch stabs, crouch slashes, jump slashes. You had the pogo stick of death. And these various tools, slashes, and combat options being available to the player were a huge step in the right direction for Breath of the Wild, or for Zelda 2 as a whole, because it laid the foundation for what would become actually 3D Link's core toolkit. But if we step into the next game that came out, we have A Link to the Past. A Link to the Past did everything the original did, but it tried to improve upon the basics. The developers understood that the combat of the original game was unpolished, and so they opted to give Link more of the same. But these tools that had been advanced, had been created for A Link to the Past, allowed Link to have larger arcing swipes, spin slashes. We had... I'm not sure if he had the Rock's Feather yet, but I know for a fact he had stuff like the Pegasus Boots, which allowed him to travel at higher speeds. Effectively, these tools began to get Link a more core set of abilities for the 2D Zelda games. And these core abilities would be emulated into A Link's Awakening, the Oracle games, and even the Link's Awakening and the Oracle games being the big heavy hitters. When 3D Zelda started to come out with Zelda Ocarina of Time, the combat system again kind of leaned more towards the classic Zelda 2 system, with a little bit of A Link to the Past. Your slashes were more dynamic. They had much more information tied to them. More dynamic movement, more footwork, more planning, more thought. It made it so that every time you had to make a specific slash, you had to have a certain degree of understanding of what it was that you were aiming for when you went to make said attack. Especially when you were dealing with entities like the Stalfos that had a counter, a hard counter to your abilities. That, in my opinion, was one of the better enemy types in the game. For some, and I'm going to point at the Lizalfos, the lizards just kind of, they come at you, they swing once, swing twice, and then run backwards back to their old arena or old spot. If they didn't hit you, congratulations, you were golden. And a lot of the time, they ended up in this circumstance where Lizalfos had a hard counter in just turtling, waiting for them to make the first move. And it wasn't until significantly later that the player actually had access to more options. The jump slash, the spin slash. You had access to magic. You had access to more tools. And it was the first time that Link actually gained access to a longer secondary sword in the form of the Bigoron sword. But we can also take another step sideways into the Zelda Majora's Mask. See, Majora's Mask not only allowed for Link to have his own combat style, but for the Deku, Zora, and Goron forms to have their own combat style. For Link to have access not only to the classic Kokiri sword, the Razor sword, and Gilded sword, all with the same basic toolkit, but also the Great Fairy sword for the two-handed variety. If that wasn't enough, you also had access to the Fierce Deity Mask to battle various bosses again, allowing, effectively, for the various masks to be used in a plethora of different ways. This was the core of what I think made Zelda Majora's Mask's combat so fun, was that you always had options. There was always a mask, a tool, a arrow, a slingshot bolt, something that could be used to level the playing field, to make whatever you were doing just that little bit easier. And that's very important for me to mention here, as it was at that point that the games really started to lean into showcasing different ways of playing in ways that really set each toolkit apart. An example, of course, I mentioned already, the Fierce Deity Mask. Then we got into the GameCube era. And the GameCube era is where I think the Zelda combat truly evolved. See, we had a few different games in the GameCube era of Zelda. Four Swords Adventures, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and we had a 2D game in the form of Minish Cap, which, in my opinion, is still one of my favorite 2D Zeldas, hands down. But each of these Zeldas brought something unique to the table. Because looking at, let's start with Wind Waker here. The combat system of Wind Waker was built on a core of Ocarina of Time. Neutral slashes were horizontal, locked on were vertical, you could do your jump slashes, but then it added the parry system that allowed you to effectively tackle an opponent that was mid-attack and do damage to them instead. This became really, really helpful when dealing with the knight or armored knight enemies. But it really didn't come into play as often as I think it could have. Maybe more often than I could have. It has been a while since I played that one. But then you end up with Four Swords Adventures, and Four Swords by extension, which effectively took the core of the 2D games and said, hey, what if? What if there were 4 characters? Now, unfortunately, I didn't have 3 friends, 4 link cables, 4 separate versions of Zelda, and Zelda Four Swords Adventures all available at any given time. So I never got to play the multiplayer version of this game. But I did have access to the original version of the game. The core version of the game, if you will. The adventure mode. And the adventure mode actually did a lot right. See, it left the core of the combat from the older games, and effectively tried to implement ways of using tools in slightly different ways. Sometimes it was the matter of I can pick up and throw my friend over a river to solve a puzzle. I can select a specific character to use as my primary character temporarily to deal damage to a specific opponent. Sometimes it was just about understanding puzzle solving. Sometimes it was about using tools in a more dynamic way. Sometimes it was just, hey, the combat right now is, getting a little stale. How do we fix it? Well, why don't we make it so that the combat involves stances, where you can literally create a defensive wall of links. This defensive wall, of course, being one of the primary means of protecting yourself in any given circumstances. The 4-cornered diamond formation that was all about raw defensive might. You're surrounded, diamond up, and brawl. And the thing is that each of these different stances also had a slightly different effect on certain abilities. The diamond effect, for example, allowed a spin attack to cause all 4 of your characters to, not turtle per se, but caused all 4 of them to spin around the central point of the diamond. The abilities of the wall formations, vertical or horizontal, meant that you could keep a larger enemy at bay without really worrying too much. And this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. The point that I'm trying to get at with all of that in mind is that even Four Swords Adventures, a game that is a little bit notorious for being I suppose a tad on the basic side, combat-wise at least, still had ways that it tried to innovate playing Zelda. And of course, you know, if you had friends and all the hardware necessary, you could also play 4-player cooperative or antagonize one another just for the sake of antagonizing one. There were always options available to you. Something that Zelda has unfortunately not leaned as heavily into as I think it should have. Once it invented the Force Sword and the Portori Sword, there was always so many more options that they could have went for that they didn't really dive into. But nearing the end of this whole escapade, we ended up with, as I was saying, we ended up with Twilight Princess and Minish Cap. Now these two were actually very unique as far as the formula goes, because these characters each started with a very basic kit. They didn't have a whole lot that set their combat style apart from the ones that came before, notably Ocarina of Time, or in the case of... Ocarina of Time or Link to the Past. That is, until you met or dealt with Swordsman Scrolls. Now, in Minish Cap, the Swordsman Scrolls are taught to you and given to you by each of the various sword masters across all of Hyrule. In Twilight Princess, a incarnation of the Hero of Time comes and teaches these abilities to this current iteration of Link in order to pass down a legacy, if you will. And these abilities actually do a lot of heavy lifting, from allowing your character to do more advanced spin dashes, from allowing your character to do jumping slashes that can rip open enemy helmets, to the mortal draw. These tools and abilities allowed far more options for the average player going into playing a new Zelda game, comparatively to what they had way back in the day. And for me, that's an amazing thing to note, because it means outright that there was an evolution in the combat system pretty early on, and it kept up more or less for the entirety of the Zelda franchise's growth. Then we get to Skyward Sword. And if there's anything I'm going to say about the combat system of Skyward Sword, it is that it was one step forward and 2 steps back. See, Skyward Sword did a lot right with its combat system. It did a lot right in using its unique tools to its advantage, allowing for the player to effectively feel as though they are holding a sword in hand, something that only the Nintendo Wii could do at the time, barring a couple of somewhat glitchy PlayStation peripherals that I'm aware of. Effectively, the only one that could do it and do it to any degree of fidelity or accuracy at the time was Nintendo. And they created a game focused so heavily around the use of these motion controls that came with the Wii that they developed an entirely new system of combat, which was effectively one-to-one tracing between the Wii Remote and Link's sword hand. Now, for me, I loved this. That was absolutely amazing playing the game, because it always meant that when I stepped into the role of being Link, when I stepped up and said, I am going to fight this enemy, I was the one holding the sword. I was the one trying to convince my enemy to leave a weak spot open. I was the one hoping to goodness that the ones with the electrical stabs didn't notice me too early and that I would have an option for defeating them relatively easily. But that's the thing. Zelda Skyward Sword's combat was more open-ended than virtually anything that came before. It allowed for, your typical spin strikes, your typical sword slashes, vertical, horizontal, but now you had your diagonals. You had access to enemies that focused so specially on defenses that every combat encounter, more or less, was intended to appear as though it were a puzzle, where every single enemy had something of an edge over Link, something that made combat more engaging in that game. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of people did struggle with this particular title, and it's... we'll go with its tracking getting a little bit buggy after a long gaming session. But these problems were minor compared to what they had managed to achieve, if only briefly. It is a shame, then, that they didn't actually continue to iterate on this technology, at least not the way that I would have hoped they would. They had the technology to do so with the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons, and I think even the Switch 2 has access to it. But they seem wary of going the direction of what I would classify as a casual route again. Now that the gaming market is kind of getting cornered into PlayStation and Steam/computers, it's, I think, becoming harder for Nintendo to find a niche that it can stick to. And the Switch 2 is definitely not one that Nintendo really... How do I want to word this? Nintendo's Switch 2, they're doing a lot of things wrong from a brand perspective. They've kind of opened the door for their system, their creation, to be viewed in a negative light. And that, I think, is one of the biggest problems with the current era of gaming, is that everybody is trying to nickel and dime. Everybody is trying to get just that little bit more out of their consumer bases. And it's not going well for the consumers. And if the consumers don't feel comfortable or don't feel like they are being thought of, they'll stop consuming. And if people stop buying games, then the entire, I suppose, medium is going to go stagnant, is going to die as a direct result of lack of faith in the medium. At least by my experience. Anywho, we're in now our third test of strength of the video. Oofty. This one is a moderate test. Faster, more agile. Actually, the health pool of the major test of strength looks to be about 2.5 times the health of a moderate test. At least based on the time necessary to battle them, comparatively to one another. I personally like the moderate tests more than the major tests. Yes, the major tests of strength are intended to be the big heavy hitters. The ones that Legend of Zelda is trying to say, hey, if you can beat this, you should probably go fight the final boss kind of mentality. They're meant to be the upper echelon of what the game can offer. But that's just the thing. It's... how do I want to word this? It could be more. they could be more than just a combat trial. It could be more geared towards testing different gear. It could be more geared towards what I would prefer, the Tears of the Kingdom route, where they would do combat trials where you have to fight 10, 15 robots, but give you a select batch of tools to work with. And you just kind of have to work with what you have. I actually really liked those shrines. They were really fun. But that's the thing. Each of these different alternative versions of tests of strength kind of did something a little bit different. The Breath of the Wild test of strength is all about one-on-one duels, so to speak. You and your opponent. You start the mission, you start the battle one-on-one, you end the battle one-on-one. Whereas Tears of the Kingdom's tests of strength often revolved around fighting multiple opponents. The goal being learning to use different tools. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit, if you've beaten Breath of the Wild, most of the time the basic tools that the game gives you really don't... You can pretty much shred through anything using your basic tools. If you haven't beaten Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom often has so many additional tools thrown your way that there's always an option. For me, the always an option style works better. And the reason is because instead of crafting a singular enemy with a variation of 4 weapons, they're crafting a enemy that is not a singular entity, but a series of them with the goal of making the final enemy, the final section, feel more unique. They're crafting specific encounters, not an enemy with 12 different variants that all more or less feel and play the exact same. But who knows? Maybe that's just me being the guy who gets a little up in arms about gaming as a whole. Anywho, with all these combat shrines under our belt, what's my verdict? I believe that almost every shrine is 100% completable. I believe that given enough time, patience, and preparation, any encounter in Breath of the Wild is completely doable. But the preparation required to make some of these runs, some of these battles remotely feasible also is what makes the runs so difficult, so challenging. And if I'm being honest, a lot of the combat side of things could have used more variation. And playing the game in this more limited moveset has allowed me a deeper appreciation of the later games like Tears of the Kingdom, which focus more heavily, more notably, on player expression, on doing things your way, on solving problems however you, the problem solver, sees fit. And that's beautiful in my mind. Because if you can't play the game, if you can't express yourself, then you're effectively just one of many multitudes of lunks doing the exact same thing. And I'll be honest, I think this is probably going to be my last take away everything but a single tool run I will ever do. Realizing just how hard these runs actually are. And that was a very fun game of jump and rope. I do gotta say that messing around the way I do, especially using like the updrafts to carpet bomb my opponents, yeah, it's a silly option that I use, but it's partially because what else do you do? Most games don't allow you the freedom to jump rope over your enemy's laser beams. They just kind of say, oh yeah, fight this guy and you're done. But knowing this, knowing how the game... I don't want to word this. Realizing that anti-fun runs really aren't all that enjoyable, I'm opting for the next run, the next challenge that comes out, to not be one of simplicity, to not strip everything down to bare bones, but to make it a run that is more about overall understanding, to push the boundaries of knowledge on a given game, to showcase just how much depth there is to a game in general. Now, I say that knowing that I'm doing something of that nature to Breath of the Wild. But if you were to break down Breath of the Wild down to just its basic combat styles, you would find that there's actually a lot of depth there. As I said, Breath of the Wild has access to a multitude of combat styles. Link has access to the one-handed short sword, which plays similarly to Ocarina of Time's combat style. You have the two-handed greatsword, which is more of a heavyweight. Your character staggers. Your character staggers and shudders. Doesn't and kind of pushes through his opponents more readily. Knocks aside enemy defenses. The heavyweight set of tools has access to abilities and common rulings that make Link even more powerful than what he is here. And the thing is that this heavyweight armor set, or tool set, really dives into heavy damage, slow attack strings. And to me, that's perfect. It makes sense. It really dives into making each combat system feel unique. Then you have the boomerangs, which have a focus on being able to throw the tool. That lining up a shot just right, being able to bonk an opponent, have your tool come back to you, and then subsequently bonk said opponent again using it as a single-handed short sword, really leaves a lot of... really makes you feel powerful in those moments. But I never really liked boomerangs. I always found that the boomerangs didn't really suit my playstyle. They didn't have enough damage to compare to the heavyweight tool set. They didn't have the iconic combat style of the Master Sword. And there wasn't a niche of high speed necessary like spears. But there was a point that boomerangs could be used in virtually anything. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. What other options do we have? Well, I've already mentioned it. Spears. Spears end up being the third core weapon type. They are effectively short-range stabby weapons. They go smack, 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 smack at about twice the speed of a one-handed short sword, making it an ideal option for tackling high-speed enemies that have a lot of power to them. But, be that as it may, their toolkit doesn't really have a whole lot of options there either. It has some of the fastest and most precise throwing angles. It has some of the fastest combat and a really nice downstrike. And when using the charge attack, specifically like the spin attack of the other two weapon types, it gives a series of stabbies that typically will take one opponent down a significant amount based on how much or how strong you feel you can. Based on how strong your tool is. There we go. But what does Tears of the Kingdom have? Reality is, Tears of the Kingdom has variations on every single one of these weapons. But the kicker for it is that the variations in Tears of the Kingdom are more personalized. If you look at Tears of the Kingdom's, I suppose, combat system, a lot of it revolves around fusion. Around using unconventional tools to solve conventional problems. Oh yeah, I have an enemy that's moving too quickly. Let me strap a case eyeball on it so that my arrow homes in on my target. Oh, I need to hit my opponent with something icy. Well, I have this horn off a icy Lizalfos, I can use that. Well, I could also I have to break these rocks. Hang on, I can fuse this Horriblin horn to it and use that as a hammerhead. Or fusing a rock to your shield so that you have access to rock-breaking tools against armored enemies. There was a plethora of solutions designed exclusively around the fusion mechanic. And that's actually one of my favorite bits about the Tears of the Kingdom combat, is that there was always room for exploration and experimentation. There was always something that made each set, each individual upgrade or item that you could use to fuse and build new tools that much more usable, that much more unique, that much more possible to drive an opponent home, to really showcase exactly what you as a player have been capable of since the dawn of time. Now, I've been rambling for a while now, and I suppose I should touch base on why I am worried about the final boss. See, the final boss, this is going to actually be a little bit weird for me. The final boss of Breath of the Wild is going to be the first time I ever fight Calamity Ganon without the use of any of the divine beasts. In fact, this will be the first time I'm fighting any of the Ganon Blights in the throne room. I know, blasphemous. But the thing is that knowing that I have to fight 4 Ganon Blights in succession before even starting the battle with Calamity Ganon, knowing that I have to battle the healthiest version of Calamity Ganon I have ever fought, while only using bombs as my core tool, leaves a lot to be desired. Now, I'm going to be honest. I'm terrified about this, because there's only so many tools, so many options available. And while I'm pretty sure that one of the Ganon Blights is going to be a pushover, the other 3 I'm not so sure of. See, it is stated pretty unanimously in the Zelda community that each of the Ganon Blights is weak to something. In the case of the Fire Blight Ganon, its core weakness is the bombs as a whole. And knowing that its core weakness is bombs means I can utilize and take advantage of its weakness all I want. There's nothing the game can throw at me or do to stop me from beating my big bad evil guys with bombs. But the other three are a little more tricky. See, how do I want to word this? There aren't any enemies in Breath of the Wild that have the range of Water Blight Ganon. And so I have to be cognizant of the fact that it is using a spear, using large sweeping attacks, using plunge attacks, throwing its spear at me, throwing ice bricks at me, and having a health pool that I have literally no idea how much health it actually has and how likely I will be to be able to defeating it with the current toolkit I have. That is my number one concern with Water Blight. I have no idea how much health it has. I know that its toolkit is vast. I know it has options to defeat me in virtually any circumstance. But I don't know what that's going to look like. Wind Blight has a much more range-focused build, very similar to Rivali. And Wind Blight Ganon has a long-range cannon that it will bomb me endlessly if I let it. Meaning that that particular entity having the cannon is going to be a huge problem. Because I don't intend to bring out the shield until I'm fighting Calamity Ganon. The other aspect of it is that it can create tornadoes, and while my memory is a little hazy, if I recall, the tornadoes of Colgera in Tears of the Kingdom shift, twist, and move depending on the needs of the entity. It is possible that that same mechanic is involved with Wind Blight. So I'm going to go with I'm scared that Wind Blight is going to have a direct hard counter to me, because every time I throw, I effectively have to stop and throw the bomb. Therefore, I can't be slacking. I have to be in the right place at the right time all the time against him. And those two pale in comparison to what I think is going to be the true bane of the final boss. You know him, you love him. Thunderblight Ganon. Now, Thunderblight Ganon is pretty well as defensive as you can get. Has high-speed offensive techniques that effectively are rush in, do a hit, rush out. And that's great. Because his core tool set brings him to me every time. But I don't know how defensive he is. See, Thunderblight, if I recall, had some very specific times that you could and could not deal damage to it. Because effectively, Thunderblight ended up in this circumstance where if you dodged him or attacked him if you attacked him without being in a flurry rush, he would effectively be able to deflect any attack that you threw at him rather easily. Arrows, no effect. Non-flurry rush melee, no effect. And so I effectively have to figure out how to deal damage to the untouchable. And that's going to be the core problem of fighting Thunderblight Ganon. Ultimately, I think if anything is going to end the run, it's going to be Thunder. But reality is that the last two phases of the Calamity Ganon boss fight, being Calamity Ganon itself and Calamity Ganon's beast form, each pose their own potential risks. The beast form is effectively a glorified cutscene and shouldn't pose any major concerns. Shouldn't. But I also don't want to count my chickens before they hatch. I don't want to get this idea of I'm doing great and then have it shown to me that I didn't do anything, that I was unable to make a dent in my opponent. See, Beast Mode Calamity Ganon is the most dangerous when you're cocky. When you think you have it, that's when he's going to deal damage to you. So, I am trying my darndest to avoid the circumstances of getting full of myself, effectively. So, be wary, that is something that is going to happen. As for Calamity Ganon itself, Calamity Ganon is weird. As a boss, it has access to every single hit of the other 4 Ganon Blights, which means it has high speed, it has access to the pillar attack of Thunderblight, it has access to the flames, it has access to tornadoes, cannons, you name it. This guy is an absolute unit. And if that was all there was to it, I would say no big deal. Calamity Ganon is designed to be harder. He is designed to take a little bit of every one of the blights and use it against you all at once. But that's the thing. Just the blights. How do I want to word this? Calamity Ganon has potential to be one of the most devastating and dangerous entities in all of Zelda history. But he falls short because, unfortunately, outside of his defense mode, he is vulnerable to almost anything the game throws at him, or that the player can throw at him. Meaning that Calamity Ganon doesn't exactly have many options or opportunities to escape player attack. So, using that, I think, is going to be the hope of completing this challenge with the minimum use of weapons. I've also decided that I won't be using the Master Sword. While the Master Sword is one of the core abilities, core pieces of Link's kit in Breath of the Wild, it leaves a lot to be desired. And put bluntly, I think that by using the Master Sword, I am unfortunately kind of selling myself short. I could do it with only 2 weapons, a bow and a shield. I just need to use the bombs properly. And if I can use the bombs properly, then that's it. I can effectively do anything. Now, reality is this a perfect plan? Absolutely not. Will it ever be? Absolutely not. But I can hope. Anyways, with that, we are now at 103 completed shrines. And I opted to take a moment, take a breath, and I went to Hyrule Castle, stating that I was going to go to Hyrule Castle and that would be the final shrine I would complete. Now, the shrine in the base of Hyrule Castle is the Shaz Kosa Shrine, a major test of strength. And the reason I wanted to save this one for last was because inevitably, if I fought this one last, it would be, in my head, a sense of finality. I wouldn't be hunting down any more shrines because everything that I could hunt down, everything I could potentially have found, is gone. It's done. It's dusted. It's dealt with. I'm not going to run around all of Hyrule for a 17th time to do 2 more damage to my opponent. And to be honest, I don't even think I can get another 4 shrines out of this game. So any more at this point is pointless. I won't get any more stamina out of it. I won't get any more health out of it. All I get out of doing more is a little bit of bragging rights. And given that this is now episode 36, 37, I'm at a point where I understand the limits of what is and is not possible in Breath of the Wild. And I'm pretty comfortable in saying that I don't need to do it all. Not right now. I have done what I can without learning major glitches, and I want to be sure that I'm only using the bare minimums. And if I'm using only the bare minimums, then yes, I am going to end up in a circumstance where what I throw at the game is going to come back to bite me. You know, Link is surprisingly explosion-proof. So, why am I saying it like this? What's the finality behind it? Well, reality is that fighting this guy, this last little mechanoid, if you will, his whole gambit is survival. He does what every other android enemy in this major test of strength gauntlet has done. The biggest difference between that and what I can accomplish, and anything else, is I can defeat him. I can have and will. And having the sense of finality, having the sense of I did it, means that I can fight Calamity Ganon and the Blights without remorse, without feeling like I left a stone unturned, without feeling as though I could have done more. I couldn't. And I think I've proven that. There is so much that can be done in Breath of the Wild. And while I could easily run around and collect all the Koroks, and I could attempt to fight each of the 4 Divine Beasts, there's simply no point. Each of the Divine Beasts are locked down in a way that I can't even enter them. And even if I could, I'd have to fight only one less section of the Ganon Blight Gauntlet. Now, reality is that if I were to defeat it or to do any of them, I would try to defeat Va Naboris and Thunderblight. Because if I can fight him separate, if I could do Thunderblight alone separately, then I could do a lot of damage to the other 3 under the circumstances I have. Sadly, that was not in the cards. But the idea is, why not try? Why not push for it? Why not see what you're capable of? And I will always say that I am capable of virtually anything, provided I put my mind to it. Anyways, with all of this being said, what's next? What's the hope? Well, we're gonna climb Hyrule Castle. We're going to destroy Calamity Ganon. And then I'm going to take a break from absurd challenges and do something a little more on the mundane side. a little more average, a little more everyday. It's not to say that that's a bad thing. Every single challenge is worthwhile doing. I just do not have the drive to do another one of this caliber right away. Especially given that I had started 3 very high caliber runs all at once. I'm a little burnt from the heavy duty ones. So we're gonna take a little bit of a rest from them for a bit. Okay, come on, you know the drill. You know, these guys really need to understand that I'm not backing down. Having beaten half as many of these things as I have, I would assume that part of me kind of wishes that they had like a backdoor system where if you've beaten X number of these things, any future major tests of strength would be a blessing shrine. Like, yeah, we had a challenge ready for you, but you've already proven you can beat it. Therefore, we're just kind of gonna let you go by. But I also understand that none of these shrines were ever intended to be beaten in this kind of ridiculous fashion. I will say I didn't realize how many of these major tests of strength there are. I had assumed that there was like maybe 6. I was very wrong. I did not mean to end up with like 10 of these things in 2 episodes. They take forever. They drain me. And they are high-end combat battles that theoretically have a lot of energy and effort that can be put into it. But when you fight them as many times as you do, without ever even changing your tools, they become mundane, average. Oh, yep, he's gonna attack, step back. He's gonna attack, step back. And I don't think I ever intended to turn these enemies into almost formulaic entities. I wanted these enemies to be neutral. I wanted them to be challenging in every single one of them brings something unique to the table. And I don't think I really knew what I was getting into when I started this challenge. See, when I started the challenge, I was all of the mindset that anything was possible. You just had to set your mind to it. That if I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. That I was going to go absolutely obscene with my rule set. Thinking, well, why not? And the one rule that I had come up with was that I couldn't use conventional weapons until absolutely necessary. And because I can't use conventional weapons, I threw away 90% of what makes the combat in the game fun. Running around Hyrule and exploring is enjoyable, even with my limited everything. But when it came to fighting monsters, when it came to the various duels, I realized that there's so much more that to be desired. And I wish I would have picked a slightly different run. Maybe a run where Link was more calorically conscious and not eating 47 wheels of cheese to defeat the final bosses. But that's just me. My point being is that every single time you get involved in a challenge, you have to find something, anything that makes it stand out. Something that makes it feel different. And I'll be honest, I could have done things a myriad of different ways. I somewhat regret picking the bomb run. The bomb run is both a challenge and a warning. See, I've seen people post online that they want players to do runs like a fists-only Dark Souls run, or, anti-fun runs, thinking that if you can beat that, that is the epitome, the peak of what is possible in the game. The absolute singular hardest run you can ever get. And they're right. It is the singular hardest run you can ever get in a game such as Zelda or Dark Souls or anything of those nature. The more you limit yourself, the harder it becomes. This is just fact. But the more you limit it yourself, the less enjoyable the game becomes for the player. So keep that in mind next time you want to do a challenge run of any notable difficulty. Anyway, to anybody who's still standing at the hour-and-a-half mark, if you like what you see, drop a like. I'd love if you left a sub. And catch you next week as we start the final boss climb. Until next time, I hope you have a good one.